now we are with the second presentation to be given by Mary-Lou Adams. Actually, I knew Mary when I visited MIT School of City Design, and when I saw the panels full of design projects on industrial urbanism, let's say, we got in touch. Now, for the first time, I have an opportunity to be in the same occasion with her. So I would like to briefly introduce her. Mary-Lou Adams is a founding partner with Dan Adams of Landing Studio in Boston, an architecture and urban design practice focused on improving the human experience and integrating natural systems in infrastructural and industrial environments. So Landing Studio and their projects have been recognized with national AIA honor awards, a Progressive Architecture Award, and the Architectural League Prize. The work has also been exhibited at institutions including MIT, Parsons, and the City College of New York. Mary is a registered architect and the lecturer of urban design in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. So floor is yours, Mary. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I'll share my screen. Okay, just gonna move this around. Okay. Yeah, again, thank you, Ogu. I'm really happy to be here and to share our work in this symposium. So here I'll be presenting the work of an MIT urban design studio that I led in the spring of 2018, where we explored design and policy strategies to strengthen Long Island City's core industrial areas. Long Island City, for context, is a district within Queens, which is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. And before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning for providing the travel funding for the studio, and my co-teaching team, Colleen Chu and Pim Jular, and especially the 13 city planning students whose really thoughtful and creative work you'll see today. I've divided the presentation into 3 parts. Well, I'll talk a bit first about what led to this studio and some background context on current development and industrial policy initiatives in New York and Long Island City, and then talk about the studio approach, which was divided into 2 sections. Business biographies, which involved field work with industrial businesses, and then ecologies of Long Island City, which looked at the physical form and policy frameworks of industry, and then conclude with a couple of design proposals that were generated by the students. The work that we did in the studio was intended to offer concrete visions for Long Island City that would complement citywide industrial economic development initiatives, and also contribute to a growing area of study on urban design, physical planning, and policy to support the development of contemporary urban industrial districts. I wanted to share a little of my background as a practitioner to give some context for the type of approach that we took in the studio. As Olgu said, I run a practice in Boston called Landing Studio, where our work is focused on the design of industrial districts like working waterfronts and infrastructural spaces like highway viaducts, where we're looking to improve the urban public realm, human experience, and natural systems. And these are some images from a project that we completed in 2016 called Rock Chapel Marine, which looks at how to integrate a marine industrial salt dock with local community priorities for public open space on the waterfront without one replacing the other. So a major discovery that came out of this work for us and our work with the industrial business here was to use the seasonality of the road salt industry, where de-icing is just really only done during the winter months, as something that could create a seasonally shared recreation space for the residents. So industrial uses during the winter, and then waterfront recreation during the summer months when the salt stockpile is reduced in size. The project also generated guidelines for the industrial business, where salt stockpiling configurations were designed to benefit nearby residents in terms of freeing up views to the waterfront and designing truck routing and queuing to increase pedestrian safety and minimize the amount of time each truck spends in the facility, contributing to better air quality for the neighborhood. So switching back to Long Island City, in 2016, there was a New York Times article where Alicia Glenn, that you see in the foreground, who was the former deputy mayor for housing and economic development in New York City, remarked, "The city's growing bigger and getting bigger, so we need to think about new ways we can make all of the messy pieces of the city fit together." And this quote was something of a launching point for the studio, pinpointing the tension between New York's strong development market, the housing crisis, and the need to develop more affordable units, and how this all starts to affect what industrial spaces are left in the city, where the word messy points to the problem with traditional approaches to land use and planning that separate residential from industrial districts, that have become now impractical with the city's diminished supply of developable land. So as both the city and developers have been scrutinizing every parcel of land for development, less profitable or competitive industrial uses have increasingly been pushed out of New York. In this article here, Glenn was also referring to the city's quest for solutions through new types of industrial mixed-use development that would happen by leveraging the market to increase the supply of industrial space and good wage industrial sector jobs. So the city was taking this concept and testing it with a set of major projects on Long Island City's East River waterfront, where light industrial uses on the lower floors of buildings would be cross-subsidized by residential towers above. This actually came into play with the really controversial proposal to bring Amazon's headquarters into Long Island City. Right after this studio was completed, those proposals were rejected by local businesses and residents, but that's kind of another story. This kind of approach represents a change in the issues that shape industrial development in New York, where the first zoning resolution in 1916 was developed in part to isolate industrial uses and their impacts away from wealthy residential neighborhoods. The geography, of course, in the US has shifted since that period of production due to a mix of economic, social, political, technological changes across scales. Decentralization through industrial suburbanization, globalization, leading to the kind of post-industrial city in different forms, the shrinking city or the kind of more elite service and leisure-oriented city. And all of this was sort of promoted by zoning changes that encouraged the redevelopment of former industrial districts. But more recently, there have been signs that the industrial sector in New York is stabilizing, and a new problem that's facing the strong market cities in the US like New York, San Francisco, and Chicago is how to preserve what's left of industrial districts. So the landscape of these kind of urban industrial spaces has also changed and tends to favor more small batch custom manufacturing that benefits from proximity to the city's population of designers and end users. We saw industries with more time-sensitive delivery, like concrete and asphalt batching, and then in essential industrial services that support public works, like water and waste management, happening in all of the industrial zones. Some recent studies in New York have also showed that industrial jobs can play an important role in creating a more economically equitable city. On average, paying almost twice as much as service sector jobs that have replaced them and providing pathways to middle income for individuals who haven't had the opportunity to attend college, which I think we heard a little bit about in the last session. The question of what urban industry is today and then what it contributes to quality of life in the city as a whole is really kind of evolving. And today, more than half of New York's remaining industrial M for manufacturing districts received some level of protection from rezoning under the Industrial Business Zoning Initiative. But the program's facing criticism because it's not really codified in zoning code, and it's unclear how effective it's really been at strengthening industrial areas, especially because the code still allows for a number of non-industrial uses, such as commercial hotels and previously self-storage, as of right, all of which are more profitable and therefore contribute to the gradual kind of deindustrialization of industrial districts. So starting in 2014, political leaders in New York outlined new strategies for strengthening the industrial sector as part of a broader agenda to create a more equitable city. In 2017, the city released New York Works, which was a job creation plan for 100,000 new good-paying jobs over the next 10 years, which targeted 20,000 new jobs in the industrial and manufacturing sector. This also complemented a $115 million 10-point industrial action plan in 2015 to strengthen core industrial areas through capital investments, updated zoning, and workforce development, and followed on another report that provided land use policy recommendations to support industrial areas. So all of these new approaches to job and land use policy are going to be limited, if not supported by creative thinking on the physical, spatial, and social dimensions of new industrial districts. That was sort of a premise of the MIT studio work. So changes in the makeup of industrial districts that are more mixed by design, shifts in goods distribution due to e-commerce, advancements in freight technology, questions of climate change and how that will affect New York's many floodplain industries are some of the pressing issues in the design and planning of industrial districts here. So in this context, where past approaches of sort of regulating where urban industrial uses are no longer relevant, Urban Design Studio looked to build on the work the city's doing and develop design frameworks to see how different pieces might fit together as productive districts that could offer quality jobs, resilient and forward-looking industries, in a more plural and inclusive urban public realm. So you can see evidence of some of the kind of phenomena that are happening in Long Island City in this photo. It's sometimes fitting to think of Long Island City as having, two simultaneous identities. It still today has some of New York's highest density industrial areas. And then at the same time, it's experienced explosive growth that's turned over many of its former industrial areas to residential towers as an outcome of Bloomberg era rezoning. So the struggle over land use here is really plain to see, where issues of gentrification and displacement, overburdened infrastructure systems, and increasing conflicts between trucks and pedestrians and bikes have really tangible impacts on the daily lives and long-term plans of residents and businesses alike. The neighborhood is facing major change, and the studio was interested in exploring what is the role that industry will play in the future of Long Island City, and what should that look like. So our initial research in the studio was based on a premise that the physical, operational, and scalar logics of industry are different and less understood than other urban typologies, and that new design and planning tools should draw from a better understanding of what industrial business practices. So we started this by doing field work with current industrial businesses through interviews, facility tours, parcel data comparisons, and analytical drawings of their operations from what we learned. And the businesses represented, a really wide range of uses that fall under New York's industrial manufacturing zoning category, from facilities that already have largely converted to post-industrial arts uses. There were a few examples of more traditional vertically integrated manufacturing, like a very large cosmetics company, to advanced manufacturing and development, like the Shapeways factory you see here, or Voice Technologies, which was another one that we visited, to more artisanal production like Ranieri sculpture casting, wholesale warehouses and suppliers like Lenovo Lumber, or General Insulation, High Fresh Asian food products, and Rapid Steel, to really heavy open air industrial facilities like Hunters Point Recycling and Sims Metal Management. And so we compiled all of the field work and distilled like 6 common themes that we were seeing that offer some insights into the policy, physical planning, and public realm issues for these businesses. The first was tenure and transience. It was unsurprising to us that property ownership status really heavily influenced a business's future plans in relation to being in Long Island City. Business renters faced uncertainty, disinvestment, and landlords speculated on future development opportunities of their industrial properties. So many were kind of eyeing their move out of the city. Risk was another factor. Although a lot or most of Long Island City's industrial areas are lying within the floodplain, and some of them had fairly major property damage from Hurricane Sandy, very few of them had concrete plans or funding to strategize how to survive the next major storm and sea level rise. Incremental growth is something that we really saw with a lot of facilities where they were just overflowing with materials, equipment, turning sidewalks and streets into improvised loading zones, stockpile areas, and employee parking lots. The public realm was just completely taken over by industrial uses informally. At the same time, increasing congestion on the streets was causing delivery delays and raising questions about how the area's infrastructure had the capacity to grow. So businesses that had the capital to expand were constrained by low FAR allowances within the manufacturing zoning category. And across the board, many of them were beginning to look at New Jersey to grow with business tax incentives that were offered there, cheaper space, and so on. So many businesses had already moved from neighborhood to neighborhood, even to arrive at Long Island City as property values were going up. And then the compatibility of uses was another issue. Today, Long Island City industries range in compatibility. So depending on trucking volumes, noise, and visual appearance, there's different zoning categories that regulate these different uses. And the different categories that are reflected in contemporary zoning really no longer match what's happening in these industrial districts. So there needs to be a kind of more refined approach to thinking about the capacity or the opportunity to mix industrial uses with other types. And then New York-centric, Long Island City's position is really the geographic center of New York City, so that's very good for connecting businesses to consumers all over the New York area. Some of the businesses require very short distances to deliver perishable goods to their end users, and others benefit from supporting more front of house industries that New York is known for, like theater and fashion, which is what has kept them in the area. And then finally, public facing. So some of the businesses also relied on frequent, like in-person collaboration with designers and clients, and accordingly were interested in making the industrial neighborhood more inviting, more safe, and more accessible to others beyond, employees and business owners. So these businesses, other business in the area would generate a significant volume of trucking. The loading and unloading activities that I mentioned was not really safely reconciled with these other types of pedestrian and bike movements through the area, creating a lot of conflicts. So in parallel, we look to better understand the physical and regulatory frameworks that have shaped Long Island City through maps and analytical drawings as a starting point to understand future industrial scenarios. And we identified 6 themes for investigation here. I'll just show a couple of them. One was just regulating industries. So looking at the manufacturing zoning category, which covers, again, a range of activities that include manufacturing as well as warehousing and distribution, waste management, and public utilities. But additionally, most of these districts also allow most commercial uses and hotels, which outcompete industrial uses in today's market. In the late 90s, also a large swath of Long Island City was zoned MX for mixed use, residential, industrial, and commercial to encourage and bring into conformance mixed use live work zones that had naturally already developed in Long Island City. However, because there was no requirement for industrial in the zoning, in this mixed zoning, the residential and commercial uses gradually pushed the industrial out of these areas. So this led us to ask, what would a forward-looking industrial zoning policy look like? Could you actually get mixed uses in a way that doesn't result in the loss of industrial space? And how can policy support Long Island City's existing industrial uses while offering pathways for growth and change? The anatomy of Long Island City, we really found that the urban fabric of Long Island City is very fragmented and disorienting. And this can really be traced back to the development history, where Long Island City started as an agglomeration of 8 independent urban villages. It also holds several large-scale developments, like the largest public housing complex in the country. And all of these things kind of create some interruptions in the urban fabric, which led us to questions of whether the proposals should seek to kind of better connect these pieces together, or whether the sort of discrete parts offer a unique opportunity to cultivate different productive districts with unique identities. The physical fabric, different eras of industry and transportation produced different patterns of buildings and open spaces. This is looking specifically at the historic freight rail networks here that have created a whole family of oddly shaped buildings and dead-end streets that have been born out of, the kind of the network, leading us to ask, how will this palette of industrial buildings and infrastructure patterns shape the future of Long Island City's productive public spaces? And in the public realm of industry, we started to look at, the sidewalks as this contested zone where semi-trailers and forklifts and cyclists and parked cars were all jockeying for space, and kind of really noted that the streets and sidewalks are where the frictions become most immediate and physical between industrial and non-industrial uses. And so this led us to a question of, like, are there benefits to this flexible and really dynamic public realm, or should future visions seek to ease these conflicts by delineating zones for different mobility systems? So I'm just going to close with a couple of student proposals. This field work with the business biographies and the urban analysis kind of served as a basis for the proposals. And I'll go quickly through 2 of them here that look at one, where the physical fabric of industrial infrastructure, and then the second, policy frameworks to support new uses with industrial districts. So the first is called Elevated Rail Remnants. And this is a project by Sarah Lee, Zoe Mueller, and Marissa Riley that looks at the historic freight rail network that supported Long Island City's original kind of industrial growth, where they point out that both present and historical traces of rail have resulted in an interrupted fabric of urban parcels, buildings, and circulation infrastructure. So here they're looking at the biggest rail yard, Sunnyside Yards, that separates Long Island City's industrial Newtown Creek district from the downtown area, and how over time it's created this collection of irregularly shaped residual parcels that you see inventoried in the graph on the right. And their first kind of major move in the project was to propose a new connection across Sunnyside Yards using existing rail structures to improve transit connections and shorten worker commutes that are inconvenient and disorienting due to the prevalence of disconnected roadways. Then they looked at the rail remnant parcels themselves that are either today underutilized or used informally for parking and staging as something that could be seen in their aggregate as a new network that could be stitched together to support industrial operations and workers, while also providing ecological and social benefits by introducing green stormwater management, tree cover to reduce the urban heat island, and new pockets of public open space. They also look to utilize the roof structure of some large industrial buildings to mediate between the elevated rail connection on either side of Sunnyside Yards. And so this is looking at their ideas for some of the uses of the remnant parcels for ecological benefit, drainage, open space, industrial support space, laydown areas, and so on. And then here they're looking at specific moments within the new interconnected circulation and open space network, where they note that the programming includes social gathering spaces, observation decks, public art installations, landscaping, and a series of showrooms that are intended to be used by Long Island City industrial businesses, the ones that are more kind of public facing. And then finally, I'll close with reimagining the 10%, which is designing a public realm network for Long Island City's workers and industries. And this is by Chelsea Bruck, Charlotte Ong, and Jielu Tan. This project, they say they offer ideas for the improvement of the public realm in Long Island City's industrial business zones with an emphasis on the everyday experience of local workers by focusing on two main issues: the lack of food and beverage establishments and the absence of nearby public spaces. So these were things that they directly observed in the interviews and tours with Long Island City businesses during the business biographies fieldwork phase of the studio. And so their proposal takes as a starting point an existing program run by the city called ICAP on the left, which is the Industrial and Commercial Abatement Program that provides tax relief benefits to industrial businesses that improve or expand their existing building as long as they use less than 10% of their space for retail purposes. And so the student group chose to experiment with a new way of looking at that policy in the diagram on the right, where they thought, well, what if we actually incentivize the production of small retail spaces for food establishments to improve worker quality of life and social ties within the industrial districts? They also proposed an addendum to the program that would incentivize businesses to build new public spaces by offering similar types of financial benefits. And then building on this framework, their proposal imagines a whole pilot network of new food, retail, and nearby public space, augmented by creative ideas for collaborations across local businesses that could take full advantage of having additional public space. So as I mentioned, their proposal was rooted in observations from industrial workers about the lack of social spaces, everyday conveniences, food establishments in the industrial business zones. So they started with an exercise of mapping out different worker itineraries to better imagine what a day in the life of this industrial zone could look like and where there were opportunities to improve that. And in their words, the decision to design for these problems resulted from over 30 interviews that they conducted with workers in the area, and they repeatedly heard complaints about the surrounding food desert and its impact that it has on the quality of life. The public space issue is inextricably linked to the food desert problem, especially when we consider workers who may not be able to afford to purchase food. Even if they're bringing their lunch from home, where do they eat it? Where do they spend their breaks? And when we consider the density of employees and business owners who commute to the business zones each day, how much time they're actually spending in these neighborhoods, it becomes clear that they deserve basic amenities such as delis, cafes, bars, and public spaces. So from there, they developed typologies of new additions based on their assessment of the existing building fabric, so new spaces within existing large buildings, or how an industrial business could adopt a nearby vacant parcel for open space, or how smaller businesses could partner with each other to create, for instance, a small kitchen in one building and a small seating area and gathering space for workers in the other. And so this is looking at that idea at more of the district scale, kind of creating a network of new spaces for food and gathering. And then they developed a series of comic-style stories that explored how different worker conveniences could be co-located with industrial uses and improve both the worker experience as well as new kind of unexpected types of relationships, exploring the incorporation of daycare centers, rooftop gyms, a nap room that you see on the left, gaming areas, and an after-work bar that you see on the right. And that's where I'll leave it. I know I'm right at time, so just wanted to thank you again for the invitation, and I'm happy to take any questions on us.
Thank you, Marie. So punctual. Thank you so much. Then I would like to ask the audience whether they have a question, any question or not. If not, I have, as usual. Well, you provide a kind of very systematic and peculiar, how do you say, an approach, a framework to deal with that issue as an urban project. So you incorporate the architectural, issues, which focuses on the internal productive space itself, and also the public space. Also, this is quite, I think, an approach to be revisited in our studios. So my question is a little bit about the practicality of the issue. So zoning is a term that has taken place in planning theory or literature, let's say, borrowed from the planning practice of in states. So it's really a kind of American term, let's say, zoning itself. So many cities in the United States, we know that they have very strict zoning regulations. So can you please elaborate more? You slightly touch upon this issue, but how the urban designers and architects deal with those regulations to integrate some kind of hybrid solutions, so-called, and new mixed typologies within their own projects?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think what we've observed working in the Northeast, kind of more dense cities is, and as I was kind of emphasizing a lot in this, the sort of loss of industrial uses, whereas a lot of zoning policy was originally developed to regulate and restrict industrial uses because it really came from a completely different era of industrial production in the United States, where there was a kind of thriving industrial sector. And now the problem has shifted in terms of, cities really can't lose all of those types of uses. There's a lot of benefits from a sustainability perspective of not displacing industrial activities so far away from centers of consumption. However, industrial uses are just not competitive with other types. And so how do you start to bring them together? And of course, the whole nature of industrial production is a little bit different than it used to be. The environmental impacts are different. And so this is, we see as really an area where design and planning and policy come together, because it's to some extent difficult to imagine the compatibility of uses without really concrete physical ideas for how that would happen. So the examples of that are being explored by the city in Queens, where they're looking at extremely high density residential developments to kind of offset the cost of providing new industrial ground floors. I think they've encountered a lot of challenges, like we've talked with some of the designers working on that, and it actually becomes a challenge in the policy side in terms of like, how do you actually define what industrial uses are, and make sure that you are kind of targeting ones that have market viability, but also are like the ones that are in fact industrial, and not kind of overlapping that with other types of creative uses that may not need the same types of protections that industrial uses do. So it's been a complicated thing, and we've been seeing a lot of new initiatives for more mixed use industrial zoning, in different cities like New York and Chicago and Baltimore and so on in the US for sure.
Have different design guidelines been written so far, specifically focusing on that issue, the industrial, transformation of the inner cities?
Yeah, I mean, the area I'm most familiar with in Boston is where there are certain zones that have been protected for industrial uses, and they don't get so far to kind of really talk about compatibility of use, other than to, and it really does become a kind of unresolved issue. There are some experiments trying to bring in, mixes of office with industrial ground floors and that sort of thing, but nothing yet has really, addressed this issue of the kind of misfit between the market the competitiveness or lack of competitiveness of the industrial uses.
Right, thank you so much. I think there is no question dropped at chat box yet. So I would like to thank you again for this very informative presentation. Thank you.